Good morning, my name's Teresa and I'm the owner of Eva Dress Sewing Studio. So each month, as you probably know if you've watched our other videos, we do a monthly make. And this month we're going to make the Tessuti Eva Dress pattern, okay, in our cotton hemp chambray fabric. Line drawings are there, see if you can see that clearly. And we are going to make view A with the sleeves. Okay, so I'll try and show you a bit more on the machine with some top stitching and things. Someone said that might be helpful. I'll certainly try, and there's some bias binding around the neck, so I'll try and show you that closer up if that helps. Okay, so the first thing to do, I have cut all my pattern pieces out. So I've got the there's the skirt piece, with the pockets. It's got pockets, 2 pieces to the skirt piece, because it has a tier around the hip line. It has a tier here, and then the bottom tier as well on both the options. Okay, so I've cut all those out, and it's got pockets. That's all cut out, and the bias binding strips, the sleeves, and the bodice fronts. So I'm just going to angle the camera down so you can see. Okay, so the first thing it wants us to do, I've got the bodice back and the bodice front pieces, so they're both cut on the fold. There's no zips or buttons for this pattern, and there's no darts either. So the first thing it wants us to do is to use the they call it Violin Shields, which is basically the same as stitch and tear. Okay, we use the Violin products here. So I've cut out those pieces as well. It gives you a separate pattern piece for those, to cut out those, and that's just going to stabilise the neckline as we sew it and put the binding in, and then we tear away that when we're done. So let's just take the pins off these first, and we can get those shields positioned in place. So that is the back, and that's the back. And the fronts. Oh, always more pins than you think, isn't there? That's the front piece. Okay, so that's on the wrong side of my fabric, which I think is this side. So all it wants us to do place these onto here. I'm going to pin those on. I'll show you what the Violin shield, what the tearaway is in a minute. So it's just like a sort of papery sort of, feels like a paper, a bit like interfacing, but it's papery. So it's not fusible or anything, because you're just going to tear it away once you're finished, but it just helps to stabilise the neckline as we're sewing it. Just pin that one around there. That's that one. The inside of the back. Attach that one to there. So we're going to stitch this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just around this. Just going to stitch around this neckline piece here, just just to reinforce that neckline. It's odd trying to... Okay, so that's those pinned on. Okay, so it's just this, it's just like a papery interfacing, but it tears easily to tear away when you've finished with it. So it just wants us to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the top there and also around the top of that one there. So I'll do that first, and then we'll make the bias, then we'll join the shoulder seams and then make the bias binding. Okay, so we're just at the machine now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my machine to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I can still run it along the foot along the edge of my fabric there. So it's handy to do that if you've got that on your machine. I'm just going to increase the stitch length because it reduces that a little bit and I don't want it that tight. So, and then all we're going to do, you don't need to back stitch, and we're just going to stitch around 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just take out your pins as you go. I don't tend to sew over pins. I know some people you see do, but you're just a risk of breaking your needle and damaging your machine, so it's best to take them out if you can. Just sew all the way around there. Put a little if you need to help it turn. Okay, I'm not going to back stitch because it's just really holding that in place like so. Okay, so we do the same thing with the back. Or is this the front? Yeah, that was the back, this is the front. Making sure it's up on the edge roughly. We could have done with a couple more pins in here, but it's fine. Okay, so that's those sewn on. Okay, so we're now just going to attach the shoulder seams. So I can probably, I tend to prefer to move my Fly's-Lean shield away from the seam a bit like that as I attach it to the shoulder seam, otherwise I think it gets all caught in. So I'll just remove that, pull that back a wee bit, and the same on that one. Just take that back, and then you're going to join right sides together. If I can see that from here, yeah, right sides together. Saves me taking it all downstairs again. And we're going to stitch those seams together. Just take that back on that side as well. Do it with my own picker just to get these out really. those stitches back a wee bit. Okay. So right sides together. See that okay? Right sides together. Like that. Back into there. Okay, and then back to normal seam allowance, and I will just want to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance along there. So we're going to back stitch. And then just back stitch at the end, just to lock those stitches in place so it doesn't come undone. That's that side. And we do the other side. Let's get some of these stitches out of the way. Again, line those up. Stitch that like that. Pin that like that rather. Okay, and again, just put that under the machine. So again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And the end a wee bit. Just back stitch first. Back stitch at the end. Okay, and then that's your 2 shoulder seams sewn together. So I'm just going to overlock those now. Okay, I can take you over to show you that. So just try and get these violin shields out of the way. Just going to tuck that under the edge. So it says to overlock your together. And the same on the other side. Try and get those. So that's those done. Okay, so I've just pressed the seam allowance towards the back, okay, towards the back here, and then it wants you to get one of your bias binding strips, and you just need to make sure that you've got the length you need. See if you need to join it to do any of your sections, but I've just measured around roughly around there, and I know I've just about got enough to go around my neckline. Okay, so next it wants you to fold your binding wrong sides together. Okay, so I'll show you that on the iron. Just make sure I've got the wrong side, yeah. It's difficult to tell on this fabric, wrong side and wrong side. So it literally just wants you to fold it in half like that. And just give it a good press. Put some steam on actually, just to help press that. Put steam on your iron's a good idea as well. Okay, just take you back to the table now. Okay, so so on the instructions it tells you to pin your bias binding to the right side, and then you turn it over to the wrong side and then stitch, but you are going to top stitch it, so I prefer to do that from the right side, then that's the side I'll be top stitching, and that's the side I know I can get a nice neat finish, so I tend to do it the opposite way round, but it's entirely up to you. So it says to measure around, then join your bias binding, but I'm going to pin it round, stitch it round, but not quite to the end, and then join it, so I know I get a nice join on it. Raw edge, your raw edge of your bias binding to the raw edge of your dress, and I was pinning it upside down. Right, let's do it this way because then I can see what I'm doing. That's it, yeah, okay. It's difficult to show sometimes on a video upside down. So, just like so. You can see that all right, yeah. So you've got your raw edges of your bias binding here, and that's going to the raw edge at the top there. And as I say, I am doing it to the wrong side and then going to turn it over to the right side and top stitch, just because I think it'll give the top stitch a neater finish from the right side. It's just my preference. Come here, pins. Okay, so that's all pinned in place. Okay, now I'm going to stitch not right to the edge here. I'm going to leave that edge. I'm going to probably start about here, so I'll move that pin along, see it easier. So I'm going to start about here, away from the shoulder seam, and I'm going to end about where that pin is there. Then I can measure and join my bias binding, press it, and then go back and stitch that last bit in a minute. Then I know I get a good fit. So I'm going to go and stitch that in place. That's just stitching at a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. But then when I'll show you how I join it. And then when I turn it over to the wrong side and top stitch it, I'll show you what we do there. That's on so far round. And then I've got my 2 pieces ends of bias binding here, so I've just folded one back at the shoulder seam line that I've got on here, and then I've just laid my other piece along over that, joining it up at the shoulder seam, and then I've just marked each piece with a heat erasable pen just where that edge is. So I've just marked that on there, just like so. Okay, and then I'm just gonna join it straight together like that. Now, strictly speaking, that's not then on the bias for your tape, but it's attached to my shoulder seam that's straight. So that's my preference to do it that way, along there, across there. Okay, so across there, trim it up, press it open, and then I can pin the rest of that binding in place. Then I'll show you how we take, and then I'm going to take the tearaway Violin shield out before I stitch the rest of the bias binding around the neck. That's my bit stitched binding that I joined and stitched at the shoulder seam there. So then I'm going to take the Violin tearaway shield out. Now it's got that binding on, so literally you just tear it away sort of from the seam, just like that, just pull it away. Okay, so that's one side, and then you just go round and get it from the other side. Just a little bit more fiddly, just to get hold of in your 1/4 inch seam, and then it just pulls away these bits, because they're smaller bits, do tend to come up in bits sometimes, but you just pull it away like so. Okay, so I'll do the rest of that, and then I'm just going to press it over on the neckline, and then I'll take it up to my machine, and then we can I'll show you how I'm going to top stitch it. Okay. Okay, so first of all it wants us to understitch around the neckline, so I'm going to do that first. So just understitching just along with my bias binding to my bodice piece there, and I'm going to stitch that all the way around. Okay. Can't see properly, get my head in the way. So just literally just to the edge of this seam. See what I'm doing, but not get in the way of the camera. Seam. Walk it there, you don't want to move. Oops. Stitch where you started from, just a couple of back stitches. There we go, so that's just, okay, so that's all understitched round like so. Okay, so I'm just going to go and now press that over to there like so. All right, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way around. Okay, so I'll just go and press that, sorry, and I'm going to fold that over there, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way around there. So I'm just going to go and press that first. So I folded that over. Okay, folded that over. So as I say, I've got mine on the right side because that's what I prefer to do, and I'm going to use my top stitching thread to stitch around here now. Make sure I don't get my head in the way. Nice and steady, just keep it along that edge just to get a nice neat finish. Foot up the edge of the fabric, the edge of the binding. So overlock, so right to the edge there. Be a bit cautious when you come up to the shoulder seam because you have got a bit more bulk there with your bias binding and your shoulder seam and everything there. So maybe a bit more heavy duty for your machine. And this is a heavy duty machine I use for my top stitching, so it's not too bad. But you might just need to, if your machine's struggling on that bit, you might just need to just stop and hand wheel, you know, use your hand to just stitch with the wheel, just to stitch over those few stitches if that's difficult for your machine. Where you joined, where you started. So your next seam is a circle. It's definitely easier to do your neck seam like they've suggested before you've sewn up your side seams and put your sleeves in. It's definitely easier to do your neckline now, because your fabric pieces, you know, you've just got a lot more room, your fabric pieces are more movable. So that makes sense. Suggested it. I'm just going to get rid of my thread there, so I don't get that all tangled up in with the others. Overlap a few stitches where you started and just back stitch a couple. There we go. Okay, and that's the top stitching along the neckline done. Okay, so I suspect now it will be joining the side seams. So I'll move back to the board for that. Okay, so it's a good idea just to give your neckline binding a press at this stage, so that's all done there. As I say, I've got done my binding to the outside, so that's the way I've got it here. If you'd have done the other way around, then that's kind of the effect you'd have had on the other side. It just would have been flatter. It wouldn't have been quite so. You'd have seen the top stitching, but you wouldn't have notice the binding quite so much, but I prefer it that way. Okay, so next we're going to join the side seams. So we just want to turn it with our right sides together and attach the two side seams here. So that one there. So using our 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch down the side here, and then I'm going to overlock it with the seams together and press it towards the back. So I'll go and stitch those first. Okay, so that's inside out at the moment, difficult to tell on this fabric, but that's inside out. So I've got right sides together, I'm going to stitch down both those side seams, this one here and the other side there, overlock them and then press them towards the back piece. Okay, so that's the side seams sewn, overlocked and then pressed towards the back. Okay, so that's those there. Put that to one side for a minute. Right, so then we've just got the sleeve sleeve piece. I'm doing version A with the sleeves. So we're just going to fold both of those right sides together, and then we're just going to stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance down there and overlock the edges, and then we're going to bind, as I say, the bottom of the sleeves are bound, and I'm going to do it the same way as the neckline, so opposite to the way that Tessuti done it, because I just want it to all match in. So yeah, we'll do that next. I'll just go and sew and overlock these, and again they'll be pressed towards the back of the sleeve. Can usually tell the back of the sleeve has 2 notches in there, whereas the front of the sleeve just has the 1 notch, whereas the back sleeve will just have 2 notches, so when you're pressing your seams you know which way to go. So I'm going to go and stitch those, and then we'll do the binding on the bottom of the sleeve. Okay, so that's the sleeve seams sewn. Get that in the right way for you. That's the sleeve seam sewn and then overlocked, and then just pressed it towards the back. As I say, the back is the side with the 2 notches on. So then I measured my my binding, where I want that, how big I want that. So I just lined that up snug to the edge of there, and then just folded that back, and I've marked a line down there and then a line along the top there. So I've just marked down from the edge there, just marked a line along there and then a line along the top there, so that I know that's roughly where I want that to be. That's where I need that to join up. And then to get your bias edges, you want to fold right sides together. I always have to think about this bit, right sides together. So I'm going to join those up there, like so. So in a cross like that. I'm going to pin that in place. So I've just lined up those, my marked edges underneath like so, so I know they're lining up correctly. In the middle, and then I'm going to draw in where I want to sew. So from there, this binding, I've angled that up, and then it's just stitched from that side there, down to there, and then I've just trimmed off the end and folded that out. So I'll just open out that seam allowance and trim off those ends. Excuse me. And then attach it to my sleeve. Okay, so that's the sleeves bound in the same way as I did the neckline for mine. So now we're going to put the sleeves, insert the sleeves into the arm side of the bodice. So you want your bodice piece inside out. Okay, so I've got that inside out, seams exposed on the outside, and then you want your sleeve the right side out, so the right way out. Okay, and then you're going to put your sleeve up inside the arm side here. So you'll have 2 notches on your sleeve, 2 notches on your sleeve, which is the back of the sleeve, and 1 notch for the front of the sleeve. So just line up your 2 notches with the back of the sleeve initially, and then you'll know that you've got the right one on the right side, otherwise you might need to change over. So we'll pin that, and then the single notch at the front, which is there. Pin that, and then the 2 side seams should join together there. Put a couple more pins in there just because it's on a curve, so you just need to make sure it all sits quite neatly together. we go, and then I'll just put another couple in there. Need quite a few pins, pinning a sleeve in. If you prefer, you can pin it and then tack it in, or depends what you're comfortable with really. Or you can sew it straight in from where you've pinned it. So then you've got a notch at the top of your sleeve, and that joins up with the shoulder seam. Okay, just up there. And just making sure you've got your seams facing towards the back, and also facing towards the back and facing towards the back on the sleeve. Okay, and then you've got a little bit of ease here to ease in. So all you need to do is just fold it so that it lines up like that. Pin it in the middle. And pin it in the centre of there again. In the centre of there. So just keep doing it. Pin it in half. So even it out. Pin it in half. So even it out. Pin it in the centre of those, between those two pins where you pinned it before. Pin it there and then pin it in the centre again. That way you just get all that ease evenly distributed in. Okay, so that's that side done. We'll just have a work on this side between the sleeve. It's between the sleeve head and the where you've got the notch that you'll have the ease. So again, just fold that so that it sits evenly in there. Pin it in the middle. In the middle again. Between there. Just need quite a few because you've got that ease. Yes, you do need quite a few pins. And the sleeve head. Again, find the middle between those two. Middle between there. Sorry, I don't know if I got that in shot. And then the middle between there. It's difficult to concentrate on what you're doing and looking at what's showing up on the screen. So that's the that's one all pinned in. Just do the other one. So as I say, right sides together. So one inside the other. Okay, so that's the sleeves sewn in place. Okay, so I've stitched them in place and then overlocked them and pressed them towards the sleeve. Now it does say in the instructions that you can gather your sleeve head to help with easing in, which I didn't used to putting a sleeve head in, but you can just run a gathering stitch, so a large machine stitch, your longest machine stitch, couple of rows from the double notch there round to the single notch there on your sleeve head, and then you can just pull them up slightly. So you don't want to gather it as such, but it might just help. You can sometimes just pulling it out very slightly helps ease that sleeve head in, but you just need to make sure you don't gather it. It's meant to be a set-in sleeve like this rather than gathered in, but it might just help get some of that ease in, but I prefer to do it without, just because I'm used to putting them in. So yeah, so that's that one. So tomorrow we'll do the skirt pieces. Okay, so this morning we're going to sew the skirt panel, okay, like this. Okay, so this is the mid-skirt panel, the piece that attaches from the bodice down to the lower skirt. So I've stitched this one together already, but I need to do the top stitching so I can go and show you that. So basically we'll have 4 pieces. for your mid-skirt panel. We'll cut 2 pairs. So we want to sew it together down the centre back seam here, this seam with the 1 notch, not the side with the 2 notches. That's for pocket placement for your side seam. So we want to sew it down this centre front seam here. So I've just pinned my fabric together, right sides together, and we're going to stitch down this centre back seam. Then we're going to overlock it. Then we're going to press it to the left side of the garment, which I've already done on this one, and then we can top stitch it down the centre back and centre front seams. So I'll take you upstairs now and show you the top stitching, the stitching of those. Okay, so it's 1/2 inch seam allowance, which I've got lined up with my machine here. So fraction actually. That's it. Okay, so we'll just back stitch first. One straight stitch. Along to the end. Oops, my pin. Back stitch at the end. Okay, so next we're going to overlock that. Okay, so just over to the overlocker now. Put a bit of thread over there, if it'll stay. It's a bit noisy, sorry. So then with it, you've pressed that overlocked seam towards the left side of your garment, and then we're going to top stitch down that centre front. So it says about 1/4 inch away from the seam, just so that you're catching that underneath seam in nicely. So line it up, back stitch at the beginning and end. Just line it up with a bit on your foot, so I can see as I'm going along that I'm just following here, just on there on my foot. So that's all I'm watching for, just to keep it nice and straight. So when top stitching, also I'm using a top stitch thread here and a top stitch needle, I think, or a larger needle, and just lengthen your stitch slightly. So I think I've got this set of 3 on here, 3mm length stitch. Sometimes I use a 3.5 for jeans, but just on this one I thought 3 was better. Okay, and that's our top stitched down the centre front there. I don't know if you can see that okay. Okay, so just trim off any ends you've got. So we're going to give that a press, and I'm going to stitch the other one, obviously, and then we'll do the pocket placement. Okay, so we've got our skirt, front skirt panel here, okay, with the top stitch down the centre. Now it wants us to pin our, first just using just on the front, not on the back. So the front panel wants us to pin 2 of our pocket pieces on. So you've got a notch here on your pocket pieces, here and here, and that lines up with the notches on your pattern piece. on your side seam, which is here and here. Okay, so that joins up with there, so that will be placed like that on your pattern, on your fabric here. So right sides together, and then we're just going to stitch from the notch here down to the notch here. Okay, so we're just going to stitch from there down to there, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to do that with both those pockets, and then I'm going to press them over, and then I'll show you how we understitch them. Okay, so using your 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting exactly where that notch is there, just a few stitches forward and then just back a few stitches. Just being careful to finish where you started, where that notch is. Sometimes you can just use the hand wheel just to check that you are getting exactly to where you want to be. Okay, so that's that one done. All right, just trim that thread. Other side. So exactly the same thing, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so ideally you need to finish your stitching sort of pretty much right on where they are there. Okay, wants you to snip just into your seam allowance where you've stitched up to. Ooh, and I'll get this in focus in the right place, just there, like that. Okay, so I want you to snip into those on each of your points for your pocket, and then press the seam allowance and the pocket away from the skirt. Okay, so you've got your seam allowance going away from the skirt towards the pocket, and the pocket going away from the skirt as well, like so. Okay, so like that and like that on the wrong side. All right, and then it wants you to understitch, so we're just gonna which is just attaching the seam allowance to the pocket. Now it advises that you start and stop this understitching here 1/2 inch from your point where you stitched previously, the point and the notch that you stitched to previously, so which is there. So I've just marked 1/2 inch down from there. Oh, stop my needle getting unthreaded. Oops. Right, so we need to go about there. Okay, so we're just going to stitch down along this, just to the this side, the pocket side, with your seam allowance underneath, just along that edge there. So back stitching also, so as you don't go past that point. Just follow along there. And again finishing at that point and back stitch. Got my threads. Okay, so let's get rid of that thread there. I should have said actually, when you snip that seam allowance as well, it does ask you to overlock that. When you snip that seam allowance before understitching, you snip there, and then it asks you to overlock just that piece along the pocket edge there. You see that? Oh, get it in focus. There we go, just along there. Okay, before you understitch it. So I'll just do the other side. Okay, so then it's just literally seam allowances just along there like that. Okay, so we'll go downstairs now, and I will attach the okay, so then we've got our skirt piece like this. We've got our, I've just pressed the pocket over to the wrong side of your skirt, like so. Okay, see that okay? Yeah, okay, so there. Just line that a bit better. Okay, so then we want to get our other pocket piece, and with the right side of your fabric down towards your pocket, we're just going to pin those two pockets together. Okay, so you should find that your notch of your pocket joins up with the notch there, and then the notch of your pocket joins up there, aligning those edges there, and then just make sure that your notch on your pockets here, got a notch on each of your pocket pieces there. Just make sure they line up together, okay, like so. And then we're just going to pin the rest so that that stays whilst we sew it. So it's just a 3/8 of an inch small seam allowance, just around the pocket edge, and then we're going to overlock around the edge as well. Few in just because it's curved, so stay lined up really. Don't want a wonky pocket. Don't want that one. A little pin. So pin that on there. Okay, so we're going to stitch just the pocket, okay, just the pocket around, all the way around that pocket edge like that, and then overlock it around as well. Okay, so I'll do that. Okay, so here we are with the skirt panel. Just let me hold that a bit so I can get that better view. Okay, so this is the pockets. Let me just unpin that so you can see. So that's how we've got them so far. So all these seam allowances, just turn and press and align at that edge there, and then we're going to pin those in place, and then it just wants us to stay stitch those. So basically, so that they're where they are, stay where they need to be, lined up properly while we attach the side seams. So just do it from over this side. So just make sure, so it'll look like that from this side. You've got your notches there, okay? And then we're just gonna, this is this little bit here, above and below each pocket. So your seam allowance here, and here, just where you've got those pocket edges, like that. So we just want to join those together, so that then we're going to attach the side seams of the skirt next. So it just wants you to stay stitch those. So just stitch those. It's asking you to stay stitch at 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll probably use a basting stitch there as it's on the seam allowance, because then if it shows through, it's just easier to take out if necessary when we've sewn the seam. Okay, so I'm gonna just go and stitch those first, and I'll show you, and then we'll attach the side seams. Okay, so I've just stay stitched those on. As I say, I did do it in a larger stitch just so that if they show outside the seam allowance in a minute when we stitch that side seam, then I can just pull those out easier. So next we want to join your two pieces, two mid-skirt pieces together. So join it at the top, and then you've got notches on your back piece as well. Oh, I've got a tiny notch there. I'm just going to join that. And I have a notch there as well. Join that one. And just even a pin in between. Bottom in between there. Now when you stitch this side seam, you just got to be careful of your pocket here. So this is your pocket on the inside there. So when you stitch this seam, you've just got to be careful that you don't stitch that pocket in at the same time. So I tend to put my pins that way on here. And I know I've not got that caught in. So as you sew along, just make sure that bit is just out of the way. Always put your hand in and just tuck it over slightly, just to make sure that you're not catching that in as you stitch that seam. All right, so we're going to stitch those and then overlock them, and then we're going to attach this piece, I think, yeah, then we're going to attach this piece to the bodice before we do the lower skirt panel. Okay, so that's our skirt panel done. We've stitched those side seams, overlocked them, and then pressed them towards the back. So then it's worth giving them a press, and then when you turn it out, your pocket should look like this. So you've got your pocket in there, like so. Okay, so now we're going to put join the bodice to the skirt. So I'm going to turn the skirt inside out, and then have the bodice in the right side out. Okay, so I just want to make sure I've got these going the right way. The easiest way to do it is to place it like that, because you want these at the front, and then you want your front piece there, like that. So have those at the front, like there. Those you want to be towards the front, like that. Okay, and then get your bodice front. So this wrong side out, this right side out, and then just pop this inside that. Okay, and then you've got notches that join up on the front there. Short on pins. One there. And then another one there. Okay. And then your side seams will join together here. And both your seam allowances should be towards the back. See if you can get those lined up well. The next round you've got another notch on the front that lines up there. Front piece. And then another notch there that lines up. And the front piece, and then your side seam again that joins together there with both your seam allowances towards the back. Try and get them well aligned if we can. There we go. Okay, so then just put a couple of pins in between. Once you've got all your sort of notches and things attached, that's your sort of landmarks as to where, you know, how it'll all fit together. And once you've got that pinned, you can just check that everything else is even in between and put a few pins in between. So we're just going to stitch around this again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then overlock it around, and then press the seam up towards the bodice, and then when that's pressed up towards the bodice, then we'll top stitch around like we have on the other seam allowances. So exactly the same, following around that seam, top stitching your, catching your seam allowance underneath, your overlocked seam allowance underneath. Okay, so that's all pinned in place. So I'm going to go and stitch that all the way around, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then overlock it, press it up towards the bodice piece, and then top stitch round, and then we'll do the lower skirt panel. Now we just need to do the lower skirt panel, so which is this piece here. So we need to pin right sides together, pin our fabric down our centre back seam, which is down here. So this is the seam with the, you'll have 2 notches on the seam here which line up. Okay, so that's this one on the centre back seam down here. Okay, move that out of the way. So just make sure your notches are lined up. So we're going to stitch, so on both you'll have 4 panels, 2 for the front, 2 for the back, joined together at this centre seam, well, it's the centre front and the centre back panel. So we're going to join those together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then overlock them, and then press them towards the left. Now it says in the instructions to press the back towards the left and then the front towards the right, but I've just noticed on mine that I've sewn already, I have got them both pressed towards the left. So obviously I wasn't paying attention before. So I'm going to do the same thing, which is fine, but I'm going to do the same thing with my with the next panel, because it just needs to all line up basically. So yeah, so I'm going to do the same with that, yeah, rather than unpicking my top stitching. Could unpick it, but then I've got to unpick this as well, so no, I'm not bothered with that. I'm just going to keep it so that my seam allowance is going towards the left, and then I've top stitched. So I'll do the same on the bottom panel. So I'm going to do both of those, top stitch them, and then we're going to join the side seams together, and then bind the lower skirt hem. Okay, so that's our centre back seams stitched, overlocked, and then top stitched. Now when pressing it towards the side, you do need to have a think about which way up you are. So actually it's that way up. The narrower bit is your hem, which kind of looks in reverse to a normal skirt because it's a slightly bell-shaped dress. So the narrower piece is your hem at the bottom, so just consider that when you're deciding which side to press. So this is my back piece and this is my front piece. So now we're just going to put right sides together and join them at the side seams, and we're just going to pin those. We're going to overlock them, we're going to stitch them 1/2 inch seam allowance, overlock them, and then press them towards the back of the skirt piece. Okay, so we've got the skirt panels sewn together. Now it gets a bit confusing because this is the bottom of your skirt, which is the narrower bit, and this is the top. So in the end I stuck a pin in the back piece of my top of the skirt piece, so that then I could figure out which way I was pressing the seams, otherwise it can get a bit confusing. So yeah, so I decided to do that to try and help me. So then it wants you to piece a couple of your bias binding pieces together, which I've done, and then measure it around the lower section of your skirt. Now for this skirt hem, I'm going to go with exactly the way it's done in the instructions, so I can show you that, whereas on the sleeves and the neckline I did it the other way round, but this time I want the bias binding to be invisible as it's on the hem. So I've pinned all my bias binding around, and it does suggest, which I agree, you should ideally join your bias binding seam at the one of your side seams. So I've started, as I've pinned it round, the bias seam on the bias binding I pinned at that seam, and then I've just pinned it around so that the other side seam I'll do where I need to join. So I've just marked there how that will line up and meet together. Okay, there, so I've just lined that, how that will meet together, so that's where I need to be. And I'm just going to take a couple of pins out so that I can join that bias binding together there, then I know I've got it the right size. Okay, so then I just need to join that bias binding. Okay, so we've attached it to the right side of our hemline. Just ensure that the hem piece you're doing is the narrower piece out of the two, because it just looks like it should be the other way round. I've pressed the seam allowance and the bias binding away from the skirt, like so. Ooh. See if I can show it, that's better, like so. Okay, so that's pressed away from the skirt like that, and then we're going to understitch around the edge of that bias binding, attaching it to the seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to start at a side seam. Just going to start in a bit actually. Put my stitch length back to the middle. There we go. Right. Ooh, can you slip off? Okay, so all the way around the edge there. Just going to try and angle it down to see if you can see a bit, to see if that's any better. So you're just following round, just so that you get the stitch just over the edge, just attaching your seam allowance to your bias binding. Let's go right around the hemline. My tummy rumbling there. Oops. Oh, sorry. when we've done this, we're just going to press it, press the binding up towards the skirt, and then we'll top stitch around the edge to sort of bind in the hem. So this under stitching just helps the binding sort of sit naturally and stop it from rolling back out. Keep it nice and neat. Nearly there. It's quite a long hem. Just take your time if you're not sure. Just take it steady, just so that you get a nice finish on it. Snip that thread and I'll come round to it. Okay, so that's all stitched around there. Okay, so next I'm gonna go to the iron and press it over like that to the wrong side. Okay, and then we can top stitch around, catching in that bias binding to create the hem. Okay, so I'll go and give that a press first. Okay, so I've folded that all over to the wrong side. Now I want to stitch, because it's top stitching with my top stitch thread, I want that to be visible on the outside. So if I measure that, you can see that there, that's just over a centimetre. So if I stitch around at a centimetre seam allowance around here, then I should catch that bias binding tape in. So a centimetre seam allowance should then catch that in. You can feel as well with your fingers where that is. I'm just going to move these pins, mass of pins, or else I'm going to knock them flying everywhere. Try not to knock the stand as well, it's in a funny position. Just go all the way around. Just take your time as you go around. I'll probably edit this and send this out. Otherwise the video will be too long. That's the problem with trying to show more intricate bits of the pattern, is that sometimes it makes the video too long. We can probably edit some of this out, as long as you get the principle of what we're doing. Okay, so that's our hem around the bottom that we've sewn there. Okay, so next we just need the last bit to do is to attach the lower skirt to the mid skirt. So just going to find, so that's the back of my dress. So I'm just lining up the back. This is the back of my dress, and then this is the back. I've marked the back with a pin there. So I'm going to try and pin those two together first. So matching up your seam lines and your top stitching if you can, just so they're nicely lined up. I can always check those in a minute. And then line up your side seam. And then line up your side seam there. This. Join up your side seams. Okay, so and the other one. Stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. So that's how you should look with it all pinned. I'll pin it in between as well. So pin that all the way around there. Okay, and I'm going to stitch all the way around there, 1/2 inch seam allowance, overlock the seam and then press it up towards the middle skirt, top stitch around that, and then we're done. So once I've done that, I'll show you what we've done and my husband to get some pictures of me wearing it probably tomorrow. All right, thank you. Okay, so that's the dress finished. Let's see if I can just hold it down. That's the middle seam all top stitched along there. Okay, so this month we made the Tessuti Eva Dress pattern in our red chambray fabric. So it's more of a fitted bodice, and then it's sort of quite a balloon shaped skirt to it. It's got pockets, yeah, but nice and comfy for the summer. So we do a sew along for this, so which you'll probably just have seen. Thank you.